Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of JS Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Was frag ich nach der Welt, which translates to Why should I have any concern about the world? I think we looked at this particular text recently, but this is a new harmonization. Very harmonically dense chorale. Some interesting quirks and turns, especially the beginning of the second system, that we will talk about when we get to it. But to start things off, we start off with A major over C sharp, and we end on D major. So I reckon we're in the key of D major for this chorale. And like I said, we started off with A major over C sharp, which is our 5/6. It's our dominant in first inversion. That goes to D major, D, A, D, and F sharp. So we have like two parts of the 1, 5, 6, 1 chord progression we typically see at the beginning of a chorale. Not always, but a lot of the time. And then we get E, G, C sharp, and E, which is C sharp diminished over E. That's a 7/6 chord. This D is a non-chord tone. We then get F sharp, A, D, and A, which is D major over F sharp. This 1/7/6, 1/6 progression is pretty normal in Bach's music. We then get D, D, F sharp, and A, which is another D major triad, but in root position, so we'll just change the figured bass. And we get actually kind of an interesting progression here. Now, I've been kind of calling these, when I've been talking about with my these chorales with my colleagues, a subdominant cadence, and they understand why, because it sounds like we're cadencing on 4. However, that's not really a conventional term, so really the only way that I can kind of analyze this cadence using conventional means would be calling it an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of the subdominant. So here we get a modulation to the key of G, where we call this 5/3 chord, or this D major chord in root position, A5 chord. And coincidentally, the subdominant cadences usually are preceded by their dominant, so it's really just the tonic going to the tonic being recontextualized as the dominant in the key of the subdominant, and this G major chord, G, D, G, and B, is now our tonic. But it looks kind of strange because immediately afterwards we're going to the key of D major again, where this G is now our 4. I'll write subdominant here as well, just so that people know what I'm talking about when I say that. Okay, then we're moving ahead to another phrase in the key of D major. This one ends in a perfect authentic cadence. We go immediately from the G major to E7 over G sharp, D, E, and B, which is a secondary dominant. It's the dominant of 5, because E is the dominant of A, which is our dominant. And that goes to A major, A, C sharp, E, and E, which is our 5 chord in root position. We also have some passing tones in the middle voices. Then we have another A chord. We have A, C sharp, and E, so it's the same chord voiced over 2 beats. And then we have a passing 7th in the bass here, before we go to D major in first inversion, F sharp, A, D, and A, which is our tonic. Because we're back in the key of D major, we would analyze that as 1/6. Passing tone in the bass before we get D, A, E, and G. So I'm hesitant to call this D a chord tone. It's actually the C sharp, A, E, and G, which is another 5 chord, but more specifically it's a 5/7 chord in first inversion, so 5/6/5 is what we'll analyze that as. Let me make that 6 look more like a 6 as well. And that goes to 1 in root position, D major, D, A, E, and F sharp, this E being a bit of a suspension over the bass, a 9/8 suspension more specifically, but still it is our tonic that gets turned into a 5 chord over the span of the next beat and a half, A, C sharp, and E, this D being a 4/3 suspension over the bass. It's a 5 chord, and then we cadence on 1, D major, D, F sharp, A, and D, tonic triad. Alright, looking ahead, we have another cadence in the key of D major. This one's imperfect authentic though, so no need to look for a modulation just yet. We go to F sharp, A, D, and A, which is D major in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass to a 6. We then go to G, G, D, and B, which is G major in root position. That's a 4 chord. Then we go to E, B, G, and B, which is E minor in root position. That's a 2 chord. And then we go to A7, A, C sharp, G, and A, an incomplete A7 chord, but an A chord regardless. We'll just make that 5/7. And technically on this beat right here, this D and this F sharp turns this into a 1/6/4 chord. So we guess we could write that in passing right here. And that does go to a 5 chord, a C sharp, E, and G, more specifically a 5-7 chord, and we can kind of write that bracket there. Technically speaking, it's there, and because it's close to the cadence, I will mark it because 1-6-4 chords do happen in proximity to the cadence. Sorry, the paper is tilting a little bit. Before we cadence on 1, D major, D, A, D, and F sharp. Okay, moving ahead, we have a phrase that's not in the key of D major. Here we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. So we do pretty much modulate straight away on beat 2 of the phrase. We start off with an A major chord, C sharp, A, E, and E. And here I really have no reason to think we've modulated already. It just doesn't sound like we have. So I still think that this is our dominant in first inversion. And of course that goes to D major, D, A, D, and F sharp, which is our tonic in root position, just like how we've introduced our first chord in the phrase. I'm going to D, or the first 2 chords in the first phrase, is what I was trying to say. However, I do think this D chord is our common chord in the key of A major. The D major is now our subdominant rather than it being our tonic in the previous key. We then have C sharp, D, D, and G sharp. I think this C sharp's an accented non-chord tone, and what we're really looking at here is a G sharp diminished triad in first inversion. So seeing 4 go to 7 is a good thing to see, because we would expect 4 to go to 7 via the cycle of falling fifths, and that goes to not 1, which is where we would expect it to go, but to 6, F sharp minor, F sharp, A, C sharp, and A, which is our 6th chord. This is a deceptive progression, or a take on a deceptive progression. Typically we expect 5 to go to 6, but it's really just the dominant going to anything other than the tonic, or just a chord that you would expect to go somewhere that doesn't go there. The dominant tends to have more of a dramatic effect when employed this way, though, or in this context of deceiving the listener. But here we have E, A, F sharp, and D. I think this E is an accented non-chord tone, and really what we're looking at here is D, A, F sharp, and, I called this a D. If we look at this, we have E, A, F sharp, and B. But if we look at this D right here, I think what's really happening is, because we're getting close to the cadence, it's getting kind of contrapuntal, but really what I think this is B minor 7 in first inversion. So we have a 2-6-5 chord, and as we're getting close to the cadence, we would expect to see 2-6-5. Bach loves 2-6-5 chords. He loves his 2-6-5s. And as we're getting closer, we, instead of getting a 5 chord immediately, we get a 1-6-4 chord, E, A, E, and C sharp, which is often accompanied by 5, E, G sharp, E, and B, like it is right here. We're seeing a lot of cadential 6-4 chords in this chorale. So actually, have we seen a lot of 1-6-4 chords in this chorale? Not really. We've only seen 1 before, but it seems like a lot because there haven't been too many 1-6-4 chords in the chorales we've been looking at recently. Regardless, this A is an anticipation in the melody before we cadence on A major, A, C sharp, E, and A, which is our tonic in the key of A major. Alright, looking ahead, we get an interesting shift in keys. We go from A major to G major, and those are not they're not neighboring keys on the circle of fifths, so the transition between the two of them isn't necessarily the smoothest, albeit they do have chords in common. So this A major chord we have is just a byproduct of the bass leaping up, no need to reanalyze. And then we go to D major, D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a 4 chord in the key of A major, but in the key of G major, it's also our 5 chord, so we'll reanalyze it that way. This E is a neighbor tone. We then get D, D, F sharp, and A, which is D major again in root position, no need to reanalyze. And then we get some passing tones. We get E and G, which is kind of like a passing 6 chord in the key of G minor. However, we have, not G minor, G major. But E, G, D, and A is kind of like a chordal harmony. We can't really analyze it using tonal means unless it resolves like a suspension. But then we go to F sharp, A, and D, which is a D major triad in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass. And then we get D, D, F sharp, and C, so an incomplete D7 chord. So there's no 3 in the chord, there's no 5 in the chord. So we just have D, D, F sharp, and C. So the figured bass for that would be there's a 7 above the root and a 3rd above the root. So not 7, 5, 3, but rather just 7 and 3. And that is concluded, or the phrase is concluded with an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of G. kind of just like the first phrase if you look at it like an imperfect authentic cadence, even though we have more reason to think that this is a in the key of G because we have the C natural before the final cadential chord. Okay, looking ahead, we have another imperfect authentic cadence, but this time it's in the key of A major. So we go back to the key of A major via a very interesting phrase. So here the chord that we have is B7, we have B, D sharp, F sharp, and A, which in the key of G major, and I have really no reason to think that we've modulated yet, this would be the dominant of E, and E is our 6th chord. So this would be another 5-6-5 as a secondary dominant, but instead of 5, it's of 6. And then what we get on the next beat is what is probably the hallmark of this entire chorale. It's the most interesting moment from an analytical perspective. We have E, E, A, and B. So this chord does not have a third. It consists of a 4-3 suspension over the bass. So for all intents and purposes, this chord could resolve to an E minor triad, which is what we would expect because we're in the key of G major, and E minor is diatonic to the key of E major. So what I think is happening here is this 5-6-5 of 6 is going to 6, but the way it resolves is not like we would expect. This 6 chord in the key of A major is also our 5 chord. Because, or actually maybe a better way to analyze this would be, I think the analysis has to occur there because right now it's kind of like a Schrodinger's chord. Without the third, we don't know the quality of the chord. So this 6 could be E minor. It also could be E major, which would be our common chord when moving to the key of A. It's a very interesting and very brilliant moment where he uses the suspension as a means of contextualizing both keys, because E minor is not diatonic to the key of A, and in fact E is a very touchy chord in the key of A because its major identity is quintessential to it having the dominant feel, because that major sound is created by the leading tone. And then we see that the chord resolves here. This G sharp is where it resolves to rather than G natural. And then we get the passing 7th in the bass as well. So this is very much a 5 chord in the key of A. Then we get C sharp, B, G, and E, which is C sharp, sorry, am I doing that right? C sharp, B, G, and E, which is C sharp diminished. Oh no, this is G sharp, apologies. We have a G sharp immediately before. So that would be C sharp minor 7 in root position. So 5 going to 3, a take on a deceptive progression. We would expect 5 to go to 1, but here we have it going to 3. So this is 3-7. Then we get a bit of a D major chord in passing 2, but the E keeps us from really analyzing that chord as something complete. But we do have a complete triad here in the lower voices. This E just throws us for a loop. But then that 3-7 chord goes to E, A, F sharp, and D, which is, I believe, this this A and this F sharp. Those are both accented non-chord tones. This A over E is a 4-3 suspension, and this F sharp over E is a 9-8 suspension. So there's a double suspension figure going on here, and this chord turns into E7. E, G sharp, E, and D. Incomplete E7 before we cadence on A major, A, E, and C sharp. And of course, imperfect authentic cadences are labeled as such because they don't have the tonic in the melody. That's really the only thing that... There are other things that are common amongst them, but the only thing that unifies them is the fact that they don't have the tonic in the melody, and that takes away from the completeness or the authenticity of the cadence, I guess. And I think it has more to do with the grammatical effect that the cadence has on the structure of the music. But regardless, we have an interesting cadence here. It's technically an imperfect authentic cadence, but it sounds a lot like a deceptive cadence to me, so I'm going to add that there and see what you think about it. But I'm going to analyze it as an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor. We start things off with D major in... We start things in the key of, sorry, how are we analyzing this? Of course, sorry, we're going to call this this A major chord, we're going to call it R5 in the key of D major. And we're going to go directly to the tonic in the key of D major, F sharp, A, D, and A, which is first inversion tonic triad. That goes to B major, G, G, D, and B, which is our 4 chord in the key of D major. And then we go to D major again in first inversion, F sharp, A, D, and A, which is another 1/6 chord. That then goes to E minor in root position, E, E, G, and B, which in the key of D major is our 2 chord. However, in the key of B minor, it's our 4 chord. And we have a couple of neighbor tones in the inner voices as well before we go to A sharp diminished 7th, A sharp, E, G, and C sharp. That's a fully diminished 7th chord. 4 going to 7 is a good sign because it follows the cycle of falling fifths. And that goes to B minor, which is our tonic. This sounded like a deceptive cadence to me. So if you wanted to analyze this entirely in the key of D, you can keep this as a 2 chord right here. You could analyze this as 7/7 of 6, and this B could be our 6. I don't know if it was just lingering in my ear because this previous part of the phrase felt like D major, but honestly, I think it's more so an imperfect authentic cadence now that I've analyzed it, because it being preceded by its dominant doesn't really have the same deceptive effect. But I'm interested to hear whether or not you felt like this cadence sounded like a deceptive cadence, so feel free to go back to listen to it and let me know in the comment section. And of course, our last phrase ends with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of the tonic. Our B minor here is going to be our pivot chord back to the key of D major. It is our submediant. That goes to A major, A, E, E, and C sharp, E, E, and A. Just like our first chord in the entire chorale, it's a 5/6 chord, A major over C sharp. And then we go to D major, D, A, F sharp, and A. We have some passing tones in the alto and the bass before we go to G major in first inversion, B, B, D, and G, which is a 4/6 chord. Passing tones in the outer voices before we get G, B, D, and E, which is E minor 7 in first inversion. That's a 2/6/5 chord. Passing tone, a little brief passing tone in the melody, a little ornament, before we get A major, A, C sharp, and E, which is a 5 chord, A major, it's our dominant. Passing 7th in the tenor, before we cadence on our tonic, D major, D, F sharp, A, and D. And that is today's analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to comment in the comment section below if you are also analyzing these chorales along with me, and you have any differences in terms of what you came up with. I'm really interested to see how other people interpret this music, especially because it's something that I'm really focusing on right now. So I'm interested to see if people have different takes on the harmony, especially what's going on here in this section what might be in a different place on your score, but for me is the second system. So I think that being said, that's really all I have to say about the chorale. It's a pretty fascinating chorale for a couple of different reasons, some interesting chord progressions. What looks very dense is actually, in many cases, just taking the same chord and iterating it over multiple beats. Like, take a look at this phrase in the key of G major. We get a 5 chord for 4 beats, just voiced in different configurations. It's fascinating. But regardless, again, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.